What's going on, you guys? This is Luke with Dark Fiction Factory. Today we are taking a look at what it would be like to go to the Roman Colosseum in its heyday, and how similar and how different it would be from going to a modern sporting event. Many historians think that these games were simply a distraction for the masses to keep them from knowing what was going on around them in the political class. People in modern times like to say similar things, that sports are simply some sort of nefarious distraction. I don't necessarily agree with that, but we'll get into that later on in the video. First, let's take a quick basic look at the Colosseum. The Colosseum opened in 80 AD and had anywhere between 50,000 to 90,000 seats according to historians. The building was massive at over 6 acres wide, no doubt the largest arena around. There were spectacular archways and entrances for the upper class, and middle class and lower class entrances around the arena to keep the flow of people safe. The seats were separated by classes, with the most affluent and the politicians having the closest seats, with the poorest of the citizens having cramped concrete seats over 300 feet away from the action in what we might call the nosebleed seats in modern stadiums. The games were typically an all-day outing, and it was often very hot and very uncomfortable. This is relatable to sports today that are still played outside. For example, the Miami Dolphins hosted a game this year that was well over 100 degrees in the Florida sun. The coldest NFL game on record was at Lambeau Field in Green Bay, where the players and the fans faced minus 13-degree temperatures. Personally, as a Florida man, I would much rather prefer the heat than the cold, but that's just me. Some sources say that admission to the Colosseum was actually free, which is a far cry from today's ticket prices. However, coins were also found on the site, implying that some payments were exchanged. However, this could have been more so for food and concessions than it was for admission. Evidence even shows that people bet on the gladiator fights, and that is a huge part, and as some people might argue, a huge problem with modern sports. This could also be another explanation for why there were coins found in the Colosseum. One very interesting difference between being a spectator going to the Roman Colosseum and a modern sporting event is that the Romans didn't necessarily know what was going to take place that day, as opposed to modern events where people know exactly which team is playing or know who's fighting ahead of time. Modern sports don't have the element of variety and surprise that the Colosseum had. Although with exuberant ticket prices today, I think most fans would probably prefer to know what they're paying for in advance. In modern times, fans flock to stadiums, tailgate outside in the parking lot, and then make their way into the stadium or arena to watch the event. In Rome, fans would walk down the main street through lots of vendors and crafters and all these people that were trying to sell them things before they got into the Colosseum. The day would typically start with music, and there would be fake battles with some comedic displays. Then they'd move into the animal hunts and beast warfare, using animals such as lions, bears, wolves, wild boars, elephants, hyenas, hippos, giraffes, and according to historians, many more. There was typically an intermission, or halftime, between that beginning part of the day and the main event, which was the gladiator fights to come later. This is where gruesome public executions were held for the local criminals. Many would be eaten alive by the beasts, or as the Romans called it, damnatio ad bestias, or condemnation by beasts. This may have worked as a strong deterrent to keep the people of Rome following the laws. Finally, we get to the main event and we get to the gladiator fights, and the crowds go wild. Now, one big misconception is that gladiators always fought to the death, which is very much not true. Many gladiators fought and gained their freedom, or even if they lost, they weren't always necessarily killed right there on the Colosseum floor. One key difference between, say, a modern UFC fight or a modern boxing match and the Romans is the emperor could give a thumbs up or thumbs down after the fight, signaling whether or not the losing gladiator should be killed, sort of Mortal Kombat style.
Finish him.
The crowd's cheering would influence whether Caesar gave the thumbs up or the thumbs down. And I always wondered, was it dangerous to be a spectator in the Colosseum? While historians do believe there were a few accidents that killed spectators, it seems that the audience was generally safe. Given that the highest classes of people, Caesar himself, the politicians, all sat up front, it's doubtful that there was any real danger in those seats. Modern arenas serve all sorts of food, many times specialized to their regional favorites. In Rome, many fans enjoyed things like nuts, berries, figs, grapes, olives, and other fruits and foods. Meat was even prepared on braziers and was likely available to the audience. Recent discoveries even showed that a form of pizza was available, although much different than what we would imagine pizza as today. Food was likely much cheaper in those days, and people even came for free bread, hence the term circus and bread. Meaning by offering free entertainment and food, the ruling class could possibly distract the public from any nefarious ongoings. This is a stark contrast from today's sporting world where you're going to pay like $15 for a hot dog, you're going to pay upwards of $20 for a beer. So that kind of brings me to the question that I have for you guys in the audience. Is it necessarily fair to simply accuse the ruling class of Rome of some nefarious dealings that they're giving away free food? I mean, couldn't they have just been giving away free food? I mean, if I go to see a football game or a baseball game and it's dollar dog night, I don't automatically assume they're trying to distract me from something, or that what they're doing is somehow underhanded. Now, while it may have been hot and cramped, the Colosseum was likely a party-type atmosphere, at least at times. The popular drugs in Roman society were alcohol, cannabis, and opium. Now, it's not a proven fact, but come on. It's very likely that people overindulged while they were there the whole day during these games, much like they do in modern arenas. I mean, almost every time I go on social media, I see videos of fights breaking out in the stands of football games, boxing matches, UFC events, all sorts of stuff. It's curious to think if a fight like that would have broke out in the stands among fans in the Colosseum, would that have been shut down immediately, or would it have just been ignored if it was the lower class and the higher seats? But what about the morality of all of it? Roman spectators likely looked at the criminals who were being sacrificed as less than themselves, and this probably would have made them feel better about themselves. On the flip side, people actually fell in love with and championed and cheered for their favorite gladiators. Some of the gladiators even became sort of pop culture heroes like we see today. There was even clay action figures or mini sculptures of many gladiators. Now, did these gladiators see any residuals on these sales? Did they have an agent who brokered their contracts for their merch? Unlikely, but not necessarily impossible. Now let's get to the main point of this video. Were the games at the Colosseum simply a distraction to keep the masses from rebelling and to keep them aloof from the goings-on of the ruling class? This seems to be the overwhelming opinion of most historians. People today often say things similar. This is often echoed in memes that feature the famous quote from Orwell's 1984 that said, quote, "Heavy physical work, the care of home and children, petty quarrels with neighbors, films, football, beer, and above all, gambling filled up the horizon of their minds." I've actually seen this quote edited quite a few times on memes to specifically point out football and beer. Now, I disagree with the notion that sports is simply a distraction. I can give people enough credit in both the modern era and the ancient era that they can do two things at once. Meaning that just because somebody enjoys the gladiator games, or NFL on a Sunday, or watches baseball religiously, it doesn't mean that they can't also be aware of what else is going on around the world. I always find it fascinating when people accuse other people's hobbies of being distractions, while never acknowledging their own hobbies. For instance, I know a lot of film fans, film collectors, a lot of video game enthusiasts, other streamers and content creators, who always say things like, "Oh, sports ball is dumb, it's just a distraction so your masters can manipulate you and hold you down." Yet these same people who spend countless hours on video games, countless hours watching films that Hollywood continuously churns out, they never take their own hobbies, they never take films and video games as a distraction. Of course, that's not a distraction, that's just their hobby. And hey, I'm not hating, I love films, I love video games. I just think it's a little hypocritical for people who always call everybody else's hobbies, everybody else's interests a distraction, but not their own. Going back to ancient Rome, sure, the Colosseum probably scared some people straight when they saw criminals being gorged alive, but were these people really so engulfed in the experience of the games that they couldn't get together after, or on days where there were no games, and discuss other current events of the time? I find that hard to believe. Some research shows that prizes were given out to fans as well. Should we rationalize that, again, anything that the upper class did for the lower class is an attempt to appease or to brainwash them, like a lot of the literature suggests? Or is it possible that the Roman Colosseum was actually maybe just a fun day out for a lot of Romans? Now, hot take here, I'm gonna be honest, I think I would have enjoyed a day at the Colosseum. I'm a huge sports fan and I love going out and watching competitions. I especially love fighting. Sure, it was barbaric, but back then they didn't have television or smartphones or any of the type of entertainment that we take for granted today. Those big days at the Colosseum could have been the light at the end of a tunnel, of a tough week, of a hard life. It could have been something for them to look forward to. Now, does this mean that I wish modern boxers or NFL players or UFC fighters would play or fight to the death? Of course not. But I really try to not morally judge people from thousands of years ago in a completely different day and age that, frankly, we probably never really truly understand. Anyway, that's about it for this video, guys. What do you think? Do you think you would have enjoyed a day at the Colosseum, or would it have horrified you? Do you think the Colosseum, as well as modern sports, is nothing but a distraction to keep the masses entertained while nefarious dealings are being done behind the scenes? Or do you think it's just a bit of escapism from our tough lives? What do you personally find most interesting about the Colosseum? And if you did go, what do you think you would have enjoyed the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let's discuss it. Thank you guys so much for watching. For more content, check out darkfictionfactory.com and more here on our Dark Fiction Factory YouTube channel. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like and subscribe and comment your thoughts. Until next time, take care.